Hello and welcome to Sketchplanations, the podcast. Discussion on facts and ideas to help fuel your own interesting conversations. I'm engineer and broadcaster Rob Bell, and with me is the creator and talent behind Sketchplanations, Jono Hey, and entrepreneur and past winner of The Apprentice, Tom Pellereau. Hello, chaps.
Hello.
Hi. Now then, have you ever heard of the Coastline Paradox, listeners? I hadn't. But once I'd seen Jono's sketch that explains it, it really got me thinking. Now I'm fascinated by it, and I often wonder if it applies to many other things than just coastlines. You should be able to see Jono's sketch that explains this concept as the artwork for this episode, but if you fancy a closer look, then go and find it at sketchplanations.com. Right then, Jono, let's get into it. The Coastline Paradox, over to you.
Yeah, the Coastline Paradox, broadly speaking, is actually very simple. Is that if you said, what is the length of the coastline of Great Britain, for example, there isn't actually a fixed answer. And if you...
What?
I know. So there isn't a fixed answer. We're used to things where if you measure them, it's the length that it is. And you can measure it more and more accurately and you'll get more and more accurately that length. Turns out with a coastline or something like that, it depends on the size of the scale that you're measuring it with. And so this is the Coastline Paradox, which is actually the smaller the unit of measure you use, the longer the coastline gets. And it's a really interesting story for that we can get into. But in brief, that is the Coastline Paradox.
I know you're a keen hiker and you are often at the coast in your leisure time. Is that how you discovered this phenomenon?
No, but you know, I often think about, as I say, we often go down to southwest of England and I put myself in that position. And I think if I was to be measuring the coast, like looking at a map of the southwest of England versus standing on the coast path versus like when the tide's out, going in and out of all the things. I do think about that a lot. No, I heard about this, including the story that sort of led up to it from a really fascinating book of which multiple sketchplanations exist.
Oh yeah,
called Scale by Geoffrey West, and I think I have mentioned it once or twice before. And he has a really interesting chapter on this, which is basically that measuring. And it's so mad. Measuring lengths isn't as simple as it might appear. And in some ways it was like so obvious and so assumed that nobody questioned it for what might be even thousands of years until this came up. So yeah, I don't know. I think of it when I'm down the coast, but I found out about it from this fascinating book called Scale.
Can I give a half-baked fact about what I know bits
as long as
about?
It's not an alternative one.
It's not an alternative one. It's about the meter and the standardization of the meter. And for years, it was this, I'm going to say, it's not steel, it's not iron. It might have been iron. A piece of iron that was deemed to be 1 meter long, and it was kept in France.
Yeah.
And that's as much as I know about it. Since we have more complex measuring, this is the half-baked bit. I don't know if you can realise. Now there is a more accurate way of defining it, which I think is to do with the speed of light or some other constants, some other kind of global physical constants that help you define a meter other than something that's just a physical piece of metal. Yeah.
I have heard that, and I can't fully make it, but I know what you mean, that it completely changed from here's this 1 long meter to something to do with distances and speeds. A bit like how long a second is or whatever is.
Yes.
We live quite near the National Physical Laboratory where, I think they actually have the atomic clock, which is oscillations of the cesium atom or something like that.
Yes.
Which is really fascinating.
Yeah, because before that, it was just a guy with a stopwatch who was deemed to be the best guy at stopping it at exactly 1 second. Sorry, I digress. Johnny, tell us about where this idea of the Coastline Paradox came from then.
Yeah, I can tell you, and I'm going to lean very heavily on this chapter from this book because he tells it so well. And it's such an interesting story. And there's various bits about the Coastline Paradox on the web, but nothing as good as what I found in this book. The story sort of starts quite oddly with this guy called Lewis Fry Richardson, who was this Englishman, who's a polymath, more or less. So he was like a mathematician, a physicist, a meteorologist. He got a psychology degree later in his life.
Love those guys.
One of the things he did was actually pioneer computational modeling for the weather using like hydrodynamics equations much before. This is around, around 1910, that sort of time, way before like a high-speed computers. And actually some of his techniques still form the basis of much like modern weather forecasting.
Brilliant.
decades later, which is quite amazing. But he has this curious history. He was a Quaker and a conscientious objector. And he lived through World War I, so he conscientiously objected, so he wasn't part of World War I directly. And he was just fascinated with war and conflict and how to prevent it. And the bizarre way that led up to the Coastline Paradox was he was looking for, from what I've read, a quantitative theory for the origins of war and international conflict. So kind of like a science of war.
Okay.
And he took some of the modeling that they were doing for chemical reactions and the spreads of diseases and things, and used them to try and model the accumulation of weapons from different countries. This country increases their military, so this country increases their military. And you get this sort of spreading effect. And he had this great term for it. He called it a deadly quarrel. So a deadly quarrel is a violent conflict that results in a death.
Yeah.
And one of the interesting things about it, which is where it led to something is interesting, because instead of looking at it from a sociological angle, or psychological angle, or even historical, he looked at lots of data on historic wars. And so he was just there focusing on data, and looking back at past wars. And he looked at his idea of a deadly quarrel was essentially, he said, well, is there a continuum? So on the one hand, you've got a guy's having a fight and somebody died. It was an individual murder. And then the other hand, you've got this top level, you've got World War II where 50 million people died.
Yeah.
And it's kind of a scale in orders of magnitude. So it's a bit like the Richter scale. So you've got, on the one hand, the Richardson scale would be 1 is a murder and 8 is World War II. If 10 people die, you're magnitude 2, it's like a riot. If 100 people or so are dying, it's a skirmish, it's magnitude 3, and you go up to level 8. Anyway, so he was really interested in war and what caused it and how to prevent it. And he had this hypothesis that the probability of a war between two countries was proportional to the length of the common border, which I think is quite interesting, right? So you go, Spain and France just match up at the Pyrenees.
Yeah.
But other places, US and Mexico or so on, have a much longer border that goes on for a long time. And some places have got big borders, some don't. And because he was looking at data for things, he started looking at the border lengths. And so, for example, he found this weird thing that the border between Spain and Portugal was sometimes listed as 987 kilometers and sometimes listed as 1,214 kilometers.
Right, okay.
Netherlands and Belgium was sometimes 380 and other times it was 449 kilometers.
Okay.
And this was a time when, we had a lot of science with the Industrial Revolution and all that. We knew how to measure stuff really well. Apparently we knew the height of Everest within a few feet. So, what could be going on? How could we be messing up the measurement of this border? Isn't that just really weird to be out by hundreds of kilometers? And so this is where it kind of started, was looking at the length of borders. And so to give a counter example, and I think which is why this is so weird, if you were to try and measure the length of the room you're in, or your living room, and I gave you a meter stick, imagine you put this meter stick one after each other, and you might get 6, and then it doesn't fit in, so you get it's around 6 meters. But then if I gave you a 10 centimeter ruler and you did the same and laid it all out, you might get 6 meters 30. And then if I gave you a 1 centimeter ruler, you go, okay, actually, it's 6 meters 28 or 6 meters 32. And the smaller your ruler, the more it converges to the precise length of your living room, right?
Yes.
That's what you expect. When you measure something, the more precise you measure it, the more accurately you get that number. So your measurement converges on the true answer of the length of your living room.
Yes. And this is where I find it becomes fascinating and where you start to get a bit lost, because I automatically want to take that to its extreme.
Okay. All right.
Do you see what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. But you can do that with the length of your living room and it will get closer and closer, like adding digits to pi, right?
Yes.
Instead of 3.142, you'll be 3.14159 and so on.
Yeah.
It will get more and more precise. So that's how we're used to in Euclidean geometry. Now, if you do that to a border or a coastline, instead of converging on the true length of the coastline, the smaller your ruler you use, it keeps getting longer. So instead of it converging on the one value that your coastline is, this is the true length of your coastline. So you start with a 100k ruler for Spain-Portugal border, and you get 900.
Because you're missing out any of the little bumps and whatever along the line.
Exactly. And if you keep on going down smaller and smaller, it just keeps getting longer. And so in some ways, this like violates these laws of measurement that we've been using for a few thousand years, which is basically this fundamental point that length depends on the scale that you use to measure it, and it isn't an objective property of what you're measuring.
Yeah.
I don't know about you, but that kind of blows my mind. And also, I think what he tries to get across in his book, which is like, it's incredible. We've had all these mathematicians and smart people from the time of the Greeks and the Egyptians working on this stuff, and nobody really noticed that. Everybody sort of, once the Greeks with the geometry and squares and triangles, and we were trying to build stuff, and you go, it's 3 bricks, 4 bricks, whatever. We sort of impose our human measurement on this. And when you look at if you look at the natural world, that's not how it behaves. Measurement works very differently.
So if we take that to its extreme, and you keep getting smaller and smaller and smaller, and the measurement keeps getting smaller and smaller.
Well, you start measuring round every single little stone.
Well, this is what I'm talking about.
Not only do you measure the fact it goes in and out, you kind of go, well, it's got stones here, so we've got to measure around the outside of that stone and the inside of this.
Yes, but Tommy, then you go even smaller, and you go around every bump of every stone, and then you go even smaller and every atom of every bump, and then you go even smaller. So are we saying then that the coastline or the border of any nation is infinite?
I mean, I think if you had a small enough ruler, it broadly gets there, which is, I don't know, it's just a sort of pretty mad.
Unless it's completely straight. There are some borders that are completely straight, in which case I don't think it matters. That's mental, isn't it?
This is what I mean. I was so intrigued by it. The first time I saw this in your sketch, Jono, that's what?
Yeah, it's that example of some things being straighter than others. So Richardson apparently published his work in a somewhat obscure journal. And of course, it was in a paper that was investigating the origins of war. So it was kind of missed for a long time. I think he had this funny, interesting name for it. It was called The Problem of Contiguity, an Appendix to Statistics of Deadly Quarrels. So this sort of fundamental insight and measurement was in that. So it took this guy, Benoit Mandelbrot, to sort of rediscover this work, and actually...
What, years later?
Yeah, years later, sort of, I think, 1960s or so, to sort of expand it and generalize the findings and figure out the maths to deal with them, So he specialized in what he called like the art of roughness and fractals and self-similarity. And to your point about how wiggly things are. So for coastlines, for example, if you look at southwest of England, has what's called a fractal dimension of 1.25.
And fractal dimension, you're talking about how wiggly it is.
A measure of how wiggly it is, yeah. So South Africa, apparently, a lot of the coast of South Africa is very not wiggly, and it was a dimension of 1.02. But Norway, if you can imagine, with Norway with its big, long fjords, you try to walk a few miles in one direction in Norway, and it takes you a really long time because it's really wiggly and crinkly, and that's much larger at 1.52. So one way to think about that is, if you increase the resolution of your measurement by a factor of 2, so you go from a meter to scale to measuring at a half a meter, the Britain's coastline goes up 25%, but Norway's goes up 50%, which is a huge amount, right? You start measuring it a scale half the size, and Norway's coastline goes up like 50%.
And if you do that again from half a meter to like 25 centimeters, it will go up 50% again.
It will keep going up again, assuming that it sort of stays as wiggly as you go in.
It's amazing.
Yeah, so it's and we've talked about coastlines and borders, but just to broaden it out a little bit, and you're probably thinking this already. Basically, enormous numbers of things in the natural world that we're all familiar with are actually sort of fractal in nature and have these similar properties, and it can be like really small if you think of like leaves and soil. Or a great example is this, I don't know if you've seen it, there's a beautiful cauliflower called the Romanesco cauliflower.
Oh yeah, I think so, yeah.
Which is basically sort of a pyramid shape, and as you look at the surface, it's made up of pyramids, and each of those pyramids is made up of tiny pyramids, and it's just this beautiful like self-similar thing all the way down. or like the branching of a tree. Or you might have seen like, sand dunes, but then you look at the sand on the sand dunes and they're doing the same pattern that the sand dunes are making on the sand dunes.
Yeah.
Clouds also, like if you were to say what's the surface area of a cloud, you'd struggle because you go down smaller and it kind of still looks like a cloud at macro level.
Yeah.
And then other things like I think the surface of the ocean, the surface area of the ocean. Stock markets, I think, also sort of do this. And then you go bigger. So you got like mountains. So actually, like if you think of a lot of Mandelbrot's work and fractals, the only way you could start to simulate in graphics realistic looking mountains was by being able to do things which look on the big scale the same they do on the small scale. Mountains kind of look like small mountains that build up into something that looks like a mountain on a big scale as well.
Yeah.
And if you take an aerial photo of the Grand Canyon, it could just as well be like a rivulet of water running through some gravel in your back garden. It just looks like a giant version of that. And then just finally to connect it to some other things, which are also super relevant, where this maths comes in is things in the body. Like we're so familiar with, you think of the surface area of the brain with all its crinkles and wiggles.
Brains are wiggly.
Yeah. And you think of the lungs where, you've got two lungs and then each one's broken into branches and then each one of those is broken into branches and then you have all these tiny little, sorry?
Yeah.
Bronchioles. Yeah. And then you get down to the alveoli, and blood vessels, or you think of like, what's the surface area of the inside of a vein, or you've got cilia on it. These things are everywhere. And yet we were kind of ignoring it for centuries when we tried to measure stuff, which is just fascinating. And that is sort of illustrated, I think, so clearly by the Coastline Paradox. So I'll shut up now but I just think it's just amazing.
No, it's very, very cool. And you're talking about other areas where it applies as well. Your results are only as good as your method. Or not as good, but your results are only as good. Is that a thing? Is that a saying?
It's garbage in, garbage out. I mean, this is definitely the case that if you get a smaller ruler and you try and measure the details of your coastline, you will get a much larger number. So if you're more accurate, it will change the results that you get.
Put in a bit more effort, you'll get a more accurate output.
I have a similar question. I think it comes down to the same thing about time resolution. So I go out for a 5K run, right? And my phone, my watch is monitoring how far I'm going. Mm-hmm. But I sometimes hold my phone in my hand and I'm like, my step is a certain length and it's not dissimilar to the distance that my arm is going up and down as I'm running. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, I presume the resolution of my kind of tracking is only doing it every few seconds, as it were. So it doesn't tell the difference in my hand going up and down and up and down and up and down. So I'm like, if this was tracking at a higher resolution, it would think that I'm climbing it would say that I've gone up every single 5,000 steps that I've done with that.
Yeah.
And so actually, the higher the resolution of my GPS may be, the longer it would seem that I've run. So I might have actually traveled a distance on the floor of 5K, but because it's in my hand and it's going up and down, and occasionally I kind of do that or I'm avoiding someone, I could very easily quadruple, double, etc. the distance that
is that how you're doing it?
The phone has travelled.
It's only running
because I genuinely
1K.
At one stage was maybe I should be holding my phone in my hand because I get almost triple the distance in 3D.
Yeah, I know what you mean there. The timing of your measurements, if you just do every second, you missed all the movement that you had in between. And I think that's the thing with the stock market having these sort of patterns as well. Like it has it on the macro scale, but also if you zoom in on a time scale of what's happening.
Closer, yeah.
You're getting that same kind of effect. But yeah, great example. When I don't know, it's cold or dark out and I just need to go for a run, I sometimes just go around the houses. Mm. You can go a long way if you just go in and out of every single road and dead end that you come to. And you don't have to go very far.
Up and down everyone's driveway along that road as well.
Yeah. Once in Bushy Park, there's this big avenue of trees. There's 2 or 3 trees in a row for good half mile or so. Mm-hmm. Yep. And I did one run, which was instead of running down the trees, I ran to the right around the one on the right, and then back to the one on the left, and then around to the one on the right. I slalomed all the way down, and it was it's interesting. I made this. It looked great, actually. I thought it should be a real event.
Yeah,
because it was quite good slaloming these trees, and I ran them really quite a long way, but in a very short space. I was like the coastline of Norway, trying to get down this bushy bark line of trees.
What was your wiggly?
My fractal dimension was huge in that one. Yeah. Huge.
I was thinking about this in a very different non-physical sense. Now that I work in TV and essentially storytelling, I saw a little parallel there. So the more detail about, I don't know, the events in history or a particular character's past or cultural nuances, whatever it may be, the more details you go into when telling that story, the more complex that story can become. And so when you're making documentaries about something, it's this kind of continuous judgment on how much detail do you add, because you want people to come away with something interesting and maybe useful. But at the same time, you need to be wary of putting people off by making whatever it is your documentary too long, that it's just, I can't watch this. I'm completely lost in this now. So is this kind of wiggle, and how much detail are you going to go into each of the wiggles within that story? I thought it was quite a nice kind of parallel to me.
That's really good. It reminds me of there's a Simpsons episode where just showing like old people going on a lot, and there's Grandpa Simpson in a supermarket, and he's trying to pay, and he gets out a coin from his wallet, and he's like, this reminds me. It was a Tuesday. I got up in the morning and I went downstairs. I set the toaster to 3, medium brown. Like, he's chatting to this cashier. There's a massive line of people. And it's that what depth do you go into for your stories? That's brilliant. I love that.
Is that the secret of storytelling, knowing how deep to go? Because I presume the depth creates memory or stirs memory, so it makes it a memorable story. Details
can be really interesting, can't they? Details can really draw you into that story, but too many details, you're like, oh, come on. Get to the end.
And we're all different in terms of our desire for certain information.
Yeah, but like John says, you could almost be infinite about how detailed you go into that story.
It's the definition of filibustering, isn't it?
I'll probably leave this bit out, but I quite enjoyed researching it. Now, I'm not a computer expert at all, which you can probably tell by the fact that I've used the term computer expert. I heard something on the radio the other day about how much smaller and more powerful microchips are becoming, right? And it's insane now compared to how it was when microchips were first invented. So on a microchip, you'll have a number of switches or transistors that deal with and process information through electrical signals, right? And on early microchips, you'd maybe have just a few transistors, but it was still a microchip, so quite small. Nowadays, you can have billions on a microchip of the same size or even smaller because of how small those transistors are becoming. And we're talking like 2 or 3 nanometers or billionths of a meter for each of these transistors, right? They're so packed in so close next to each other. But the difference here to the Coastline Paradox is that, well, with this technology, or with current technology at least, there's a physical limitation to the size of those transistors, like down to when you go like beyond the size of an atom, you can't get it to do what you need it to do. Whereas with the Coastline Paradox, you can keep going smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller, right? And getting longer and longer and longer and longer totals.
Although you might be constrained by the same when you start getting down to the atomic layer.
On a coastline?
Yeah.
But then you go subatomic. Because all you're doing is measuring it. You don't need to do it. It doesn't need to do anything.
Yes, you are correct.
And then you go half of that, and then go half of that.
Yeah. There's a game here. Half of that, half of that. Infinity plus 1.
I don't know how you guys feel about infinity. I remember learning it about the concept of infinity at school. It would have been maths or physics probably. And it was enjoyable. I enjoyed learning about it, but I've always felt a little uneasy, with this kind of sense of utter chaos. And things being infinite, because there's this complete lack of control in my mind. It's like, well, anything's possible then. That's mad.
I've never had that reaction, but I can see it. I think like the number 0 was around as early as the other ones as well, which is curious.
Yeah.
In a similar kind of way.
Yes. 0, just absolutely nothing.
Like there's nothing. Why do we need a number for that? Yeah.
Good. Amazing. Is there anything else anyone wants to add on the Coastline Paradox before we round this topic off?
The summary is it's like meaningless to quote a length of things in the natural world without the scale at which you measured it, which is just so different. Human world, lengths are lengths, but in the natural world, complex, crinkly, crenulated.
Brilliant.
Yeah. Oh, I do have one last thing. Mandelbrot is known for fractals, which is like a pattern repeating in itself.
Yes.
And so I've got my only fractal joke.
Oh, maybe.
He's called Benoit B. Mandelbrot. Do you know what the B stands for?
Nope.
The B stands for Benoit B. Mandelbrot. That's my only fractal joke.
Do you know what the B stands for? Lovely. Listen, thank you, chaps, and thank you all for listening. And just remember, as you move forward in life, your results are only as good as your method. Is that it?
Sure.
See you next time. Go well. Stay well. Goodbye.
Bye.
All music on this podcast series is provided by the very talented Frank Cinelli. And you can find many more tracks at frankcinelli.com.